Steve Rannazzisi now admitting he lied about escaping the Twin Towers on 9/11, confessing he wasn't even downtown that day.
I tweeted him, I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, and I tweeted him saying, hey, heard you got into comedy because of 9/11. I think that's really cool. And then he tweeted me back something like that. And I was always like, what a weird response.
Almost everyone alive on September 11th, 2001 has a memory of where they were, but studies show nearly 40% of them misremember at least one detail of their story.
He described being on the 54th floor of the South Tower as an employee of Merrill Lynch. Merrill Lynch did not have offices in the World Trade Center. In 2001, there's no record of his employment.
You know what? Let me just call my dad and see if he's there.
Some, like comedian Steve Rannazzisi, misremember all of their story. They lie about where they were.
I don't know. I couldn't tell exactly where it went in, so I had no idea.
Right.
So I called up to the office, and they were like, it was pandemonium. Like, we're on our way down, and then I just started.
Yeah, they answered the phone after a fucking plane went through the building.
My job is to collect 9/11 stories, and I can tell you honestly, it might even be more than 40%. I saw the first plane hit on CNN. You could hear the bodies hitting the ground on TV. I knew even then the jet fuel couldn't melt steel beams. If I read any of those statements, I'll email back the author and say, you sure about that? No footage of the first plane's impact was broadcast until the next day. No networks aired the live sounds of bodies hitting the ground. And the power of retrospect allows people to push their opinion, or sound smart.
And you know, some of my close friends in comedy are huge Bill Cosby fans. We've had this argument for years. I never thought he was funny. That's...
It's easy to say Bill Cosby was never funny now because who's gonna die on that hill defending him? In retrospect, he's not funny. And in retrospect, we know everything about 9/11. The power of retrospect tells us the Iraq War wasn't the best idea, but we get into it because the majority of American politicians were in support at the time.
You can't undo a vote for war just because a war stops being popular.
I received so many 9/11 memories that transitioned into their thoughts on the war, and the vast majority of them say they knew it was a bad idea. But according to a Gallup poll, support for the Iraq War is at 72% the day the invasion began. Stories change with retrospect, and unlike politicians who always have a record, the average Joe can usually say whatever they want without consequence. As a result, many 9/11 stories delve into historical fiction.
A cab pulls up. He's like $500 to Brooklyn. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, I can only make one trip out. They're shutting the island down. You guys pay. I'll sit in the front seat and tell some jokes.
Oh, God, man.
So, since I collect these stories, how do I determine which of them aren't true? I have a 5-point system. And keep in mind, this can be used for spelling out BS in any story.
Do you understand?
Yes.
We'll start with timing. This one's the easiest to figure out. A lot of times don't match up. The story will say they got out of their 8 a.m. class at 9 and made it home just in time to see the second plane hit live. The plane hits at 9:03, so that's a time span of just 3 minutes. And they mentioned driving to campus at the start of the story. I asked how long the drive normally took, and they say 10 minutes. So, making it home at 9:10 at the earliest, they saw a replay of the footage, and their memory convinced them it was live. Adjusting these stories is an easy fix, and honestly most timing inaccuracies are out of convenience of storytelling. No one wants to say they rushed to their car, made it home as fast as they could, and got there just in time to see a replay. Lack of confidence.
What?
This one's been the strangest to me. I actually won't accept some stories because the writer has still little confidence in their memory and they make it known. I still can't believe how many stories I received that start out by saying, I was either 6 or 7 years old.
7? Try 8. 8?
You can do the math, there's no question about this one.
Heard enough.
I refuse to keep any story this way because it automatically puts doubt in the mind of the reader. If this person doesn't even know what age they were, how can I know if they really saw the towers collapse live? So long as the story isn't outlandish, I don't question it, and simply just ask for the exact age. This mostly comes out of laziness, but laziness is what can lead to blended memories.
Checks out. Okay, sir, you're free to go.
Good, because I got a hot date tonight. Odd date. Dinner with Fred.
Accuracy. I've watched every major US news broadcast on the attacks and seen just about as much footage as anyone can. So I'm usually able to pinpoint exactly what source people are talking about when they describe seeing or hearing something on TV. I received a story where the writer described her horror as her teacher turned on the TV for the class to watch. The reporter on air went inside the building, where you could hear bodies hitting the ground outside. This never happened. Footage like that never aired on TV during 9/11. What she was thinking of was watching the Nade brothers documentary 9/11, released 1 year later, which does go inside the North Tower. I adjusted it to say her teacher turned on the news and she could tell that people were jumping, which is entirely true. All stories can be true if you cut out enough to salvage that truth. Again, the reason why this happens is because of the dramatics of storytelling. Hearing bodies hit the ground is much more gripping than saying we watched the same CNN coverage as everyone else. They aren't lying on purpose, their mind's just spinning a narrative that's grander and more exciting. For me, the simplest story about watching mass murder on TV is still a story about watching live mass murder. It's exciting enough witnessing history be made. Changing the accuracy of the moment to be more dramatic makes reality seem like soap opera, and no one mistakes that for truth. That leads to my next point.
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too. Yes.
Cinematic. I read a book on 9/11 memories where I swear half the stories were watching the towers come down was like Independence Day. Watching people run was like Godzilla. Watching the bridge evacuation was like the 10 Commandments. The story that sticks out in my mind the most was a man evacuating the towers and how he described that experience. He said walking down the stairs was like being in Frankenstein with the ominous music playing. So the thing is, the film Frankenstein has no music. It was made during the transition period of silent to sound films, and the filmmaker still hadn't figured out that these films needed a musical score. I'm not saying that guy's story is inaccurate, but the Frankenstein music reference was something that was added to ground the story and reach out through a cinematic lens. Everyone knows Frankenstein, and the storyteller thought it'd be far more interesting to use it as a storytelling device, rather than just saying, man, it was ominous walking out that building. The thought process goes like this. It was scary. So what else is scary? Horror movies. And what's a horror movie? Frankenstein. 9/11 was like Frankenstein. Again, this is a strange one because it isn't inaccurate. He's not even claiming to have thought it during the moment, and the argument can be made that later Frankenstein films did include music. I give his story a pass because the rest of it's grounded, and I actually think he did a great job telling it. But I do bring this up as a warning against memories that entirely depend on film comparisons. Many people tell memories that go sentence after sentence of it was like, to the point that nothing original in their own experience remains. It becomes a film script.
Not in my movie.
And I'm not saying pop culture shouldn't be included in these memories. They appear quite commonly from people interviewed in that moment.
The building began to disintegrate, and we heard it and looked up and started to see elements of the building come down, and we ran, and honestly it was like a scene out of Independence Day.
In fact, one of my favorite stories is about a girl who saw the news and thought it was promoting a film like Independence Day, which had aired a fake news broadcast about its alien invasion before the film was released. The problem is when people try to make their stories like Independence Day, when art influences life, or at least memory. Many D-Day soldiers were interviewed about their experience and described fictional scenes from the 1962 movie The Longest Day as if they actually took place. Determining this one is something you have to have an ear for, and in some cases, I don't mind it. If I was going to reword that story, I would just say, I felt like I heard ominous music playing in my mind. I had to get out. No need to bring the monster into this.
I know from experience, dude. You know what I mean?
No, you don't.
Finally, retrospect. I'd use this word a lot so far, and it lies on the opposite end of the spectrum from lack of confidence.
You are amazingly self-assured. Has anyone ever told you that?
I received a story once from a man who said, I knew it was bin Laden immediately, because he bombed the Trade Center back in '93. That terrorist attack was not organized by bin Laden. When I told him I would be removing that sentence from his story, he just said, I know things you don't know. There's no way to argue with that. People see the past differently because it's the past. There's been lots of sanitizing and reshaping it, so it's easier to understand, fit the narrative, or current social norms. Some of the most interesting stories to me are the ones where the writer actually admits to racism, and how they openly express hatred towards Muslims. They don't use retrospect to ignore the past, they use it to re-examine the way they acted, and I'm happy to say the majority of those stories I've received about racism end with the writers saying they've moved on from their past beliefs. This is why 9/11 doesn't need to be sanitized. It wasn't all unity and flag waving, it led to hate, terror, and fear of a different breed. If I read a story that's 100% accurate predicting the future, or understanding that situation, I'm going to question it. It is entirely true that person could be accurate, and usually in just talking to them I'm able to establish this. People message me saying that they were in the towers, and then when I ask a very specific question, they don't answer back. They know the game's up, they won't even push it. Retrospect's the worst in those pushing an agenda. The biggest example of this is the Muslims celebrating on rooftops footage, which does not exist. The footage everyone's thinking of are of Palestinians celebrating, which was combined with the story of the terrorists gathered across the river in '93 to watch the bombing. Despite an extremely obvious explanation, people still refuse to accept that it didn't happen because that goes against their agenda. So why would anyone lie about the 9/11 story? We'll get to him, but for most people, the truth is they don't even realize they're lying. Look at the Mandela effect, and how many people refuse to believe the Monopoly Man doesn't have a monocle. 9/11 was almost 20 years ago. There's such an importance placed in where were you that it's given plenty of people time to adjust their stories in their heads. Civilization was built on storytelling, and it's human to want to tell the best story you can. That's why our brain combines memories or exaggerates details. Any man who catches the big fish isn't going to say it's the same size every time. Alright, back to Rannazzisi and the minority that are purposefully lying. They have one of two endgames: pushing an agenda, or hero worship, namely for themselves. I've read multiple confessions of men who walked in the bars and pretended to be 9/11 first responders, so they could get free drinks or sympathy from women.
Try fireman, less to take off.
And I started crawling over people who were burnt from head to toe, who were cut up, and I was trying to help them.
The former president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network was a woman who was never even in the building that day. The elaborate hoax wasn't revealed until 2007. She was interviewed by the media, spoke at universities, and led tours of the Tribute Center.
How could you say that? How could you say that she's a fraud?
9/11 is what produced America's modern concept of hero worship, and many desperate for attention wanted a slice of that pie. I don't even mean hero worship in that they put on a cape and carry men and women out of the building. If you say, "I was inside the towers on 9/11, you become the center of attention. There's a trauma associated with you that makes you tragic and therefore interesting. This hero worship isn't just limited to New York. I'll get some stories where the writer obviously sees himself as the center of attention in Wisconsin. They'll either speak of themselves as a great American who handled the tragedy with dignity, or as an all-knowing truther, trying to convince the massive sheep of their wild conspiracy. If you're wondering why the 90s pop culture, it's the moral to my system. Understanding that 9/11 has no main character, it's not a movie. Let's compare two separate 9/11 stories here. First, from Rannazzisi.
I was there, and then the first tower got hit, and we were, like, jostled all over the place. Everyone remain where you are, stay calm, we're figuring things out. And I was like, well, I'm going to go check this thing out. So I went downstairs, saw all the pandemonium, and then about 5 or 6 minutes later, and then it just bang. While you were standing right there. Well, it's like underneath the giant overpass.
And then from Pete Davidson.
So, yeah, my dad, if you don't know, he was a fireman. He died 9/11. I didn't really care when my dad died. It didn't bother me very much because I was 7. You don't understand things when you're 7. Like, I remember my dad died and my mom was like, "Your dad's dead, but we got you a PlayStation 2." And I was like, "Yeah, cool." I was like, that seems about even.
Unlike Rannazzisi, Davidson actually has a connection to 9/11, and as a result could easily spin his story as cinematic, but his focus is instead on how mundane it was. Pete has timing, confidence, accuracy, and no agenda pushing through retrospect. He named his comedy special after his father, got tattoos honoring the fallen, and is the most prominent child of a 9/11 victim. Despite his fame, Davidson isn't using it to make 9/11 about him, and that's part of why you can tell he's so offended by a comedian he respected using his platform to make a tragedy about himself, when he wasn't even there. It's selfish, and it's the attitude that destroys a nation in the wake of tragedy. I know he feels ashamed, and I'm glad Rannazzisi came forward and finally told the truth. As for his career, comedians depend on storytelling, and how are you going to believe anything he says from now on? The qualification for a hero is one who is selfless, and because of that, heroes don't see themselves as heroes. The firefighters working recovery at Ground Zero have talked about how depressing it was leaving the site and seeing crowds in the streets, waving signs saying, "God bless our heroes." They didn't feel like heroes because they were looking for men like Pete's dad, and only finding bodies, only remains of the dead. The world always needs heroes, and 9/11 showed us that anybody can be one. When you tell a story where you're the hero, where you're the center of attention, who are you telling it for? The world? Or yourself? Where were you on 9/11? American September is a documentary film project collecting stories from all over the world. Visit AmericanSeptember.com to share your story and view the memories collected so far. If you'd like to see more videos on 9/11 history and its impact in culture, please subscribe to the channel.